Okay. How many of you have been to one of these before? Very loyal crowd. Thank you so much. For those of you who haven't, my daughter came to me. She was 9 years old, and she said, "What do you do? Where do you go? Mom's here. You're not here. Where do you go and come back?" And I thought, okay, I told her, well, I'm not going to tell you. And then I said, but I'm going to show you in your class. And then I created this simulation, and the idea was that we would have design day one day, manufacturing day another day, market day another day, and finance day another day, and all the way along they'd keep track of their money. And then we'd have an investment day at the end. And I brought it to the teacher, and she said, "Oh no, this is going to be a bad idea." And I kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And when I do, it's really hard to say no. So I kept pushing, as you all know, right? Kept pushing, and finally she said, "Okay, but only after all their testing is done." And so, late May, put on this thing, and the class just lit up. The place just lit up, and I think every kid is a capitalist. They just lit up, and it was so exciting that the principal of the school came in and said, and my daughter was in 3rd grade at the time. She said, "You have to teach my 4th grade, my 5th grade, my 6th grade, my 7th grade, my 8th grade." And I said, "I got this other job." But it stuck with me after I did it again for my son in his class, and it worked. We recorded the whole thing. We came up with a program, and that was the beginning of BizWorld. And then BizWorld under Charlene has taken on all sorts of new directions. And good job. This is really wonderful. Thank you. But it keeps that hey, we learn how business works kind of thing out there. So we have an amazing guest today. This is Sal Khan, and I have admired him from afar for years and years. And I think what I'm going to do is just start with, at Draper University, we always talk about entrepreneurs as heroes. And all heroes have an origin story. So Sal, if you would just start out, tell us your origin story.
Oh, sure, yes, and great to be here. Well, if you go, my original background was in technology. I actually briefly worked for one of your investments.
Which one?
Me VC.
Oh my gosh, we got to tell them quickly about Me VC.
Oh, yeah. At the ripe age of 22, I was their CTO.
Oh my God.
I worked for Andy.
Your part of that job really worked, but then somehow we had that regulator problem.
Y'all figured that out? Well, I think we just had a NASDAQ problem, but...
Right, but then my lawyer kept saying, no, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that, and pretty soon there was no reason.
Yeah.
This was the first public venture fund in the world, and in effect, the SEC shut it down. And we had to sell it. It was a mess. We had to raise money. We raised all this money. Everybody was all excited about being an investor in venture capital. It was fantastic. And then my lawyer says, well, you can't invest in anything you've already invested in. I say, well, okay, but that's what they want to do. And you can't invest in your private fund the way you invest in a public fund. And then he said, but that's what we were going to do. And then they said, and you can't, you actually can't make the decisions on this fund. And I went, $300 million just wanted me to invest this money, and now we can't? And so we had to sell it, and somebody got a real bargain for the whole thing. Anyway, thank you for at least getting that going.
That was my learning experience too, because I was the two founders, kind of CTO and chief of staff. I was sitting in the office. Tim would walk in every now and then, like, hey, Tim. But when the NASDAQ collapsed, and by the time all that happened, I said, maybe I should, figure out what I want to do with my life, and I go to business school. After business school.
Harvard Business School.
Harvard Business School.
MIT undergrad,
MIT
right?
undergrad.
What did you study undergrad?
Math and computer science.
Terrific.
And then after business school, I find myself at a small hedge fund in Boston. And a year later, I get married. My wife's family's from New Jersey, so my family from New Orleans came up to visit for the wedding. And it just came out of conversation a little bit after my wedding that my 12-year-old cousin Nadia was having trouble with math. I offered to tutor her remotely. She goes back to New Orleans. I work with her. She catches up. At that point, I call up her school. I know schools really appreciate these calls. I said, I really think Nadia Rahman should be able to retake her placement exam from last year and put it into a slower math track. They said, who are you? I said, I'm her cousin. And they let her, surprisingly. And the same Nadia who was put into a slow track was now put into an advanced track. I was hooked at that.
So you got them to put her back in the slow track, and then you moved her up to the fast track?
No, she was already in the slower track.
By
convincing them to help her get caught up and a little ahead. And then I became what I call a tiger cousin. And I started tutoring her younger brothers. Then word spreads in my family, free tutoring is going on. So I'm tutoring 5, 10 cousins, family, friends every day after work. And I saw a pattern that the reason they were struggling wasn't because they weren't bright, wasn't because they weren't hardworking, wasn't because they weren't going to good schools, is they just had gaps. And so I started writing some software for them. That was the first Khan Academy. Didn't have any videos at the time. And then by 2004, right after the wedding, we actually moved out to Silicon Valley. And I was at a dinner party, and one of my friends, the host of the party, I was showing off all this software that I had written for my cousins. I'm a super fun dinner party guest. And the host of the dinner, his name's Zuli, he said, well, this is cool, Sal, but how are you scaling your lessons? I was like, it's hard with 10 cousins, the scheduling, etc. And he said, why don't you record your lessons as YouTube videos for your family? I said, it's a horrible idea. YouTube's for cats playing piano. It's not for serious. But I gave it a shot. And, after about a month, it's a very, very similar story. It started with family. And after about a month, I asked my cousins for feedback. And they famously told me they liked me better on YouTube than in person. And what they were saying, is that they just liked the on-demand. They didn't have to feel embarrassed if they were in algebra class and they forgot how to divide decimals. They could pause, repeat. But we still stayed on the phone. So the human element was still really important. But yeah, before I knew it, by 2007, 2008, there were a few 100,000 folks who were using. I actually had to turn off the software for new users because too many people it was crashing my $30 a month hosting. And but the videos also had a life of their own. And so 2008, I set it up as a not-for-profit, mission-free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And then 2009 is, I had trouble focusing on anything else. So that's when I quit the day job and tried to take the plunge.
Okay, so that... millions, maybe even billions of people have benefited from this. And so thank you for that. And now I'm going to go into one of the tougher questions, which is, you made it a nonprofit. Any regrets there? This would be worth several $billion today. And then, second question is, Sam Altman was able to somehow take a nonprofit and turn it into a for-profit. I don't know exactly how that worked, but it must have been in the best interest of all the people around the table. What are your thoughts on that? Have you ever had sort of like, God, look at what I've done? And then, okay, you've got at least $1 billion worth of karma. Isn't that right? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. There is actually a series of Harvard Business School cases now on us, and the first one essentially is that question: Should Khan Academy be a for-profit or not for profit? And look, I am also a born capitalist. I worked in tech. After business school, I worked at a hedge fund, which is about as for-profit as anything. you can do. I mean, there's a bit of irony here at business school. They don't really fail anyone, but they tell you internally that you would have failed. If on the one class that I got,
I know a couple of guys who looped out, but yeah.
The one class you get a 1, 2, or 3. I got a 3 on, which is essentially you would have failed, but we're not. Was social entrepreneurship.
But it's a higher number.
Yeah. It's a higher number.
It's like golf. My golf game.
Exactly. So social entrepreneurship, it wasn't obvious when I was in business school that this was going to be my path, but once this started happening.
That's funny. I got a D in Marxian economics.
Okay. That's where you know your path lies. Where they don't see your brilliance. What was that? Oh, the for-profit, non-profit. Yeah. So obviously, I'd worked in a very for-profit world, hedge funds, and every day I would talk to 4 or 5 companies, and I was the person that made them think very short term. I was the person who was trying to figure out what they were going to do for earnings that quarter, and asking them this, and going to the filings, and to some degree I became a student of seeing, your capital structure is going to affect a lot of what you become over time. And I do think that most of the innovation, most of very good things most of it is coming out of the for-profit sector. But when Khan Academy I started getting letters from people about how it was helping them and things like that. There were a few VCs, very well-intentioned folks who had reached out in 2007, 2008, and it was intriguing. They said, hey, I'll write a check right now, you can quit your job, you can, and, but for me, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this, but for me, the second conversation was always, okay, what can we put behind the paywall, or what can we monetize? And it wasn't obvious, I would get these letters from like an orphan in Mongolia about how it helped her, right. And I was like, well, she wouldn't be able to use it. And I read a lot of science fiction, and one of my favorite books is the Foundation series, Isaac Asimov. Yes, and I'll give you the quick synopsis. I'm not giving away the ending. All of you young people should be reading it.
Yeah, did you read Prelude too?
I read all of them.
Okay.
I read all of them. I even have an Isaac Asimov little signed letter someone gave me at my house, framed.
So cool.
So the premise of the book is 30,000 years in the future, humanity's colonized the galaxy, there's a galactic empire, and this academic, Harry Seldon, through his work sees that the galactic empire is about to enter into a 10,000-year dark ages. And he decides to do something about it by collecting all of the world or the galaxy's knowledge and know-how into a foundation on the perimeter of the galaxy, and his psychology, statistics, economics, he thinks he can shorten that dark ages from 10,000 years to 1,000 years. And I remember when I read that, I was actually in about 7th or 8th grade, some same age as many of y'all. I remember thinking, wow, imagine thinking on that scale. And it was the first time that I appreciated that a civilization isn't based on how tall its buildings are, or its military. It's really based on what's going on in people's heads. And a little of my delusional science fiction side of me, when I was getting all these letters and Khan Academy was taking over my life, I was like, well, what's a home run as a for-profit? Well, it could be Google or, that's a low likelihood. And I was like, but there's something about education where market forces, and we've seen this, I think education and healthcare are the 2 areas where market forces, the payer, the beneficiary, and the decision maker are all different people. And we have values as a society. If someone wants to learn, we should have them learn. Or if someone's bleeding, treat them first, then check the insurance. And so I didn't want to preach about healthcare, but the idea is, well, what if Khan Academy could be like the foundation? What if it could be, the same way that you have institutions in the real world like Harvard and Oxford and the Smithsonian. The somewhat delusional idea for one guy in a walk-in closet, actually not too far from here, was maybe Khan Academy could be that, maybe hopefully one day reaching billions of people. And I had done back of the envelope math even in those early days in 2008, and we're now much, much bigger. But I remember seeing that even in a month, more people were using us than people had attended Harvard in its history. And it just shows you the scale that you can start to get. And so that's, I'd never worked at a nonprofit, I never started a nonprofit, but that was the idea. And then the last piece was, there was a little part of me, when I started Khan Academy, I didn't have kids. My first child was born in 2009. I said, wouldn't it be amazing if his kids or his grandkids could learn from Khan Academy? And a lot of great for-profits, but very few have that generational stay true to their mission. So that was kind of the, and in terms of do I regret it? No. Every now and then I meet, some of my well-established friends like yourself. But no, I don't. I consider myself one of the luckiest people on the planet. I get to do what I like, and I have a good life, and yes.
Oh my God.
He agrees.
I had never, look at the head bobbling.
He's
I can't believe that Hari Seldon had that. You are the Hari Seldon.
Oh.
And maybe we were going to go through dark ages because the teachers union weren't making much progress. So, whoa, good job.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, we'll hope. We're about to enter some type of a singularity, so we need all the help we can get, but yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, so we're at BizWorld. We're supporting kids. Put yourself back in a 10-year-old's, I don't know, are any of them still here? In a 10-year-old's mind, and what were you thinking then, and what advice would you give yourself as a 10-year-old?
Yeah, I think when I was 10, at every age, even when I was 30, frankly, I think we all have this tension in our life of, I want to make sure that I can support my family, buy a house, have a decent life, go to restaurants, everything, just have a decent, at least, middle class, upper middle class life. But at the same time, I think everyone, not just young people, say, well, I also would love to make my dent in the universe. And it could be at any scale. One thing I told myself when I was working with my cousins, because I had gone through that roller coaster at MeVC, where for a while I would, I might be worth millions by the time, and it didn't happen. And then it's funny, I had actually, by the time I was working at the hedge fund, I had sworn off entrepreneurship. I said, I don't have what it takes, I don't have the emotional fortitude. And so when I was tutoring my cousins, I did start to have dreams. Maybe this could serve millions of people one day. And I would have my friends from business school come, hey, what are you doing? What's the differentiation? I've heard that. I'm like, no. It's just a family project. And if it just helps my cousins, it's worth it. And I think that's what allowed me to protect it from. So what I would tell 10-year-olds or 15-year-olds or 25-year-olds or 45-year-olds are, and I meet a lot of recent grads, are do all the things you need to do to have a good safety net. Do well in school, go to college, major in things that are likely to get you a good job, try to go work for a great employer, save some money, buy a house, all that stuff. But make sure you have some time to fiddle and just keep fiddling. And at some point, these things that you're fiddling with, you're going to hit product market fit, which is the hardest thing. But once you hit product market fit, I saw product market fit when I saw random people emailing me. You saw product market fit when you visited your kid's school and they wanted more of it. So when you see that, you will be in a position to maybe quit your day job if you do have some savings, if you can do it. And I see the extremes. I have some friends from college, and we used to sit at the dorms late night. What would you do if you had $1 billion? A few of them have made it. A few of them have made a lot of money. But if you don't give yourself that time to say, what are you passionate about, you might forget by the time you're 30 or 40 years old. And then I do know people in the other extreme where you went all in, but maybe the timing wasn't right, the product market fit didn't hit, and then you didn't have that strong foundation. So everyone's journey is different, but I would say always be fiddling. I'm still always fiddling. It's actually hard for me to, I started vibe coding because I just wanted to see, and I just built it's Yamala.ai. I just put it on LinkedIn for all these people. I need a better way to for people to serve resumes. And I've been telling every young person, hey, if you want to be noticed at the top of the resume stack, make an AI agent that represents you.
This is not inside your
No, it's just fiddling.
Academy.
It's just fiddling.
Yeah.
I did it last weekend. And it's amazing what you can do with AI now. So I think it's always, you see problems out there, just fiddle. And now we live in a time where the tools and the resources you need to do any of this you have it all. You don't need, once you hit product market fit, then yes, call up Tim, raise some millions of dollars, but you don't need the millions of dollars to get that product market fit in most cases.
So, I think I like the other message, which is start a business that's just for your family. My sister came to me and she said, hey, I need money for this movie that I'm going to produce, write, direct, and I'm going to put my kids in. And she said, so look at it this way. Either we make it big and it becomes a big deal, or we have a really great family movie. and she put us all in it. It's called The Naked Brothers Band. It was a huge hit. It was on Nickelodeon. It was a big, huge thing. But we all started just going, oh, this will be funny, So yeah, I think the family thing. So think about everything as kind of like, does this work for your family? And then do you go from there? Okay, now another question is, nonprofits are also businesses. It's just a different vehicle. It's owned by society rather than the shareholders. I know, like, there's a micro lending company called, starts with a K, Kiva, that started out as a for-profit. It started to go out there and start doing micro lending. And then the regulators said, whoa, you can't do that. You have to become a bank. And a bank, that's $30 million a year in regulation. And so they said, well, what if we're a nonprofit? We can do all these other things. So my questions are two. One is, what can you do as a nonprofit that you wouldn't be able to do? I mean, I got the idea that the paywall scared you, and hey, people now kind of go, well, here, this is for free, and then you can pay more. But then take it further. What is the business model of Khan Academy? How does that work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you still need resources, and Khan Academy, to be clear, is much more than me now. We're 350 full-time folks. But just to answer the question of what can we do that we couldn't have done, our budget now it's a real budget. It's pushing $100 million a year, and but I point out that is the budget of a large high school in the U.S. So we think we're having a very high social return with that, but it's mostly philanthropically supported. But even to the philanthropists, many
it's all donations. From
mostly, we get about 15, 20 million.
Individuals.
We have about 100,000 folks who are donating $20 a month. So these are just regular folks, but we also have large-scale philanthropists.
So you make that optional for them? You just say,
hey,
if you liked it,
exactly,
give us $20 a month.
Exactly. That's pure donation. And we also do work with some with districts around the world where if they need support, training, we do have some services. So not-for-profits can have revenue. It just doesn't. There's no owners, as you mentioned. But I think the things that we can do that would have been hard. And you see this, when we started, there were, and I think they did great things, there were a series of for-profit education-focused ventures, a lot of the MOOCs, et cetera. And I think when they started, they were saying many of the same things. A lot of the MOOCs were, we're going to democratize college education, et cetera. And I know the people who founded it, I think they had all the best intentions. But I think when we're taking philanthropic capital, our board meetings are all, hey, Sal, it's great that you're reaching a lot of people, but let's make sure you're reaching the people who need it the most.
How many people on the board?
On our board, we have 12 people on our board. So we have a small. It really does look like a startup board, as opposed to some nonprofits have larger boards. But the conversation is that while I think some of the for-profits in education that started with a similar mission, they did have to go kind of where the money was, even if their social return they were having in other areas. So they might have had to go to corporate training, et cetera, where they're still adding value, but they had to change. I think we get volunteers that people aren't usually wanting to volunteer for a for-profit. So when we go international, we get usually businesses or philanthropists in those regions to sponsor Khan Academy and pay for it, and then get volunteers, or they pay for people to localize it, et cetera. Normally, if you're a company, you're not going to get that. And I think just the trust. People recognize that when I call a school district or when I talk to a minister of education, in fact, I often point out, like, if you guys do this, I don't get a penny. In fact, if anything, I might have to raise more money. It might make my life more complicated. And then that immediately puts their guard down. That like, okay, we're aligned. We just want more kids in my region to learn. They're not trying to make a sale or something like that. So I think those are and you know, talent is the other one. And in that Harvard Business School case, a lot of times people say, how is Khan Academy going to attract talent? Because we are a tech firm in a lot of ways, when literally people could go across the street and work at Google, and we found that if you pay, you know, we pay better than most nonprofits, but we can't give stock, et cetera. But there are a lot of, you know, some of the best people in the world want, if they can at least have a middle class, upper middle class life, want to devote their gifts to a mission. You know, some of the people, we have John Ressig on our team, who many of y'all might not have known of him. He created jQuery. He's one of the most famous programmers in the world. He's not independently wealthy. Google would pay him $3 million a year if he went there, but he works for a tenth of that, or less than a tenth of that at Khan Academy. So you can attract great talent if you have good mission, great people to work with, and you pay decent.
So if you're working with these schools, are they? I mean, I get that you let their guard down, but they're generally threatened, right? Because they've got this little cushy relationship with textbook manufacturers and you know, the unions and the whole thing. How do you get them? Do you go to the parents, or do you go like, and if enough parents are involved, then they force it down the school's throat, or do you just get really good teachers who say, hey, this is better than what I'm teaching?
Yeah, you know what? The good thing is we have not gotten gotten pushback just on the principle of what we're doing. Even in the early days, I think most educators, if there is a way that they can improve outcomes, they would love to do it. I think what usually the biggest...
Is it supplemental? Is that usually the way
it can be both. You know, there's a young woman who grew up in Afghanistan, couldn't go to school because of the Taliban. Khan Academy was her school. She found out about it somehow. And she became a refugee in Pakistan. This is 2 years ago. She applies to MIT. And MIT is very impressed with her application, but they're like, you have no standardized test scores, you have no grades, you have no nothing. And so this sister nonprofit we created, schoolhouse.world, which everyone here can use. It's free tutoring. You can also certify your knowledge by taking a Khan Academy assessment, but it proctors you. She did that, and then they accepted her at MIT. And actually, I met her this past summer. Right. Oh yeah. I met her this past summer. She came for this Y Combinator OpenAI, like the best soft AI engineers in the world summit for college students. And my wife and I took her to Zorene's in Palo Alto. And she's like, oh yeah, I had to miss the Elon Musk talk, but I came to this. I was like, no, you should have gone to the Elon Musk. That's a good. But you know, so it can be used. It's meant to be used as a safety net in that, but you know, that's an extreme circumstance. But we also know a lot of inner city schools, a lot of rural schools, they might nominally teach an algebra class or a calculus class, but it's not the same level of rigor. And so that's another thing that we want to be able to provide. But for most mainstream schools, yes, it's a supplement. And we have a ton of efficacy studies that show even if students are able to put in about 60 minutes a week, which isn't a lot, it's accelerating them 30, 40, 50%. And so we make the pitch to superintendents, chief academic officers, and usually they're open to it. Almost all of them have a story, and they're, oh, my niece says thank you. It helped her get to the SAT. I even met an assistant superintendent recently. It maybe shows how old I am, who says, oh yeah, you got me through graduate school. So we're starting to get a generation of teachers and ed leaders who are actually in some ways our alums. So there's an openness to it. So I think the main friction is there's just so many competing interests in their day. There's the curriculum, which tends to be overloaded. There's other things. So a lot of our pitch is, hey, maybe we can help save teachers time with some of the AI tools. And teachers, if you're able to do this, your kids are going to accelerate better test scores, better outcomes, et cetera. So we're making decent headway.
Okay, so your book is all about AI. My son comes to me, he goes, all our jobs are going to be taken by AI, so we better do something to bring AI into the venture business. So we have gone after that in a big way. And people have asked me, well, am I going to lose my job to AI? Well, not if you use AI, is the answer. But if you resist change, you will be left behind as far as I'm concerned. But tell us a little bit about your book and what prompted it and what's the thesis?
Yes. So we had very early access. Summer of 2022, Sam Altman and Greg Brockman reached out to us. This is 6 months before ChatGPT comes out. People had known about GPT 2 and 3, which were cool, but no one thought it was going to change the world. And they said, well, they essentially gave us a preview of what would be GPT-4. And it blew our minds, as it eventually would blow everyone's minds. And just to appreciate how early this was, I remember when they gave access, and we had to sign up all sorts of NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, you could imagine. I remember asking Greg Brockman, I was like, does this only work in English? And he says, yes, it only works in English. And my family, I was born in New Orleans, but we're Bengali, so I have very basic Bengali I could speak. I said, let me try to speak to
Cajun, probably.
Cajun, too, yeah. I'm not sure I wonder if it could speak, the cultures are very similar, though. But right when I got access, one of the first things I did is I tried to speak to the AI in Bengali, and it responded back to me in Bengali. And so I took a screenshot and I sent it to Greg, and he's like, oh yeah, right after you asked, we tested it. It looks like it speaks every language. So there was a lot of emergent phenomena. And one of the first things, one of the first things, people in the movies, you always think robots talk like this, they don't have it. But quickly, just prompting it to, rewrite. One of the first things I did is I rewrote the Declaration of Independence in the voice of Donald Trump. We're going to have the best country ever. George III's a loser. He is. But the fact that it got the tone, so we're used to this now. But this, I was like, this. And then I said, you are the Robin Williams character in Good Will Hunting. Be an empathetic tutor to me. And it did. And it had issues, it made math errors, hallucinations, all of these issues. But that's when it dawned on me and us that this is a big deal. And we started grappling with all the issues. This could also be a cheating tool. You could have unsavory conversations with it. How do you know if it's giving you the right facts, things like that. But I told our team, like, look, there's too much positive that you could get out of this. Students, frankly, everyone needs to have exposure to this. So we should turn all these fears into features and move forward. And so, yes, by the time it all came out and we launched on the same day as GPT-4, we were able to launch what we call Conmigo, which is our tutor, teaching assistant, et cetera. And, one slight change, even I'm guilty of it. I've always said you shouldn't put technology in front of the problem you're trying to solve. You should think about what's the problem and solve it in the simplest way. And I think I was guilty of that too, even with AI. And now I'm very clear. The problem, or one of the opportunities, is the same thing that I was working on with my cousins, that anyone can learn anything as long as they get some personalization. If they have some gaps, they can slow down, they can speed up. I'm a big believer in mastery learning, competency-based learning. It doesn't matter how long you sat in a chair, it matters whether you know it or not. It doesn't matter if you took 3 years of French, it matters can you speak French. And so if we can use technology to bring that type of learning into a classroom where you have 30 kids in a room, all the better. And we see AI not for AI's sake, but it should be part of that equation. Another layer of support is what we're seeing. But I'm probably my next book will be about jobs in AI, and openly I am very worried. Right around here you see these Waymos driving around. I think within 2-3 years, none of us are going to be going to traditional rideshare. What's going to happen to all of those Uber and Lyft drivers?
Yeah, but do you ever interview your Uber driver? Here's what I learned.
Yeah.
From your country, when you were in your country, what did you do?
Oh, yes.
Is one of the great questions. Oh, yeah, I've been a nuclear engineer. I've been I operate on brains. I do. Those drivers, they got potential.
Oh, yeah.
There is a lot to them.
But the key is...
And there's very few that will, not have something better to do.
But the key is how do we, they need to find some pathway, or even at a global scale, the Philippines, 6 or 7% of their GDP is call centers directly. I talked to a VC friend.
Not the same as nurses for them.
Nurses too, and a lot of that's kind of an export nursing,
right.
But call centers are there. And there's AI systems that are starting to replace 80% of the call center workers. And so what's going to happen to their economy? So I do think all of us should be thinking very seriously of what are the skills that people definitely need to know, and how can, if you do get laid off when you're 30 or 40 years old, how can you switch into something that is growing?